Nathan Walker had already convinced himself this would be his last winter. Before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe one small act of kindness can pull a person back from the edge, subscribe, because stories like this remind us that hope often knocks when we have stopped listening. Now, back to Nathan. Snow had fallen for 3 straight days over the mountains outside Livingston, Montana. It drifted across the empty roads and settled heavily on the pine branches, turning the wilderness into a silent ocean of white. The wind moved through the trees with a low, mournful sound, like something searching for a way home. Nearly 20 miles from the nearest town stood a weathered cabin at the edge of a frozen valley. Its porch sagged beneath the weight of snow. A single yellow light glowed behind the frost-covered windows. Inside, 42-year-old Nathan Walker sat alone. He was a former Navy SEAL, a man trained to endure almost anything, but his body no longer obeyed him the way it once had. Illness had taken pieces of him one season at a time. First his strength, then his endurance, then the belief that tomorrow might somehow be better than today. His once powerful frame had grown lean. The lines around his eyes had deepened. A faded German shepherd tattoo rested along the side of his neck, barely visible beneath the collar of a worn flannel shirt. The fire crackled softly in the stone fireplace, casting long shadows across the room. The scent of burning cedar filled the air. On the small wooden table beside him sat an untouched bowl of soup, now cold. Next to it rested a folded letter. Nathan stared at the paper for a long time. He had rewritten it 3 times. Every sentence felt smaller than the silence surrounding him. He was not angry anymore. That had burned out months ago. He was not even afraid. Mostly, he was tired. Tired of the doctor's appointments. Tired of the medications. Tired of waking up every morning feeling like he was losing a battle nobody else could see. Nathan glanced toward the window. The world beyond the glass looked empty. Forgotten. The same way he often felt. He slowly picked up the letter and read. The first line again. If someone finds this. His hand tightened slightly, then loosened. Nathan leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Memories drifted through him like distant smoke. Sunlight over desert sand. The smell of dust and fuel. Laughter from teammates long gone. Promises made years ago. Promises he wasn't sure he had kept. A sharp cough pulled him back to the present. He reached for a glass of water and took a slow sip. Midnight approached. The storm showed no signs of stopping. Nathan looked toward the letter again, then toward the fire. He wondered how many people disappeared every year without anyone truly noticing. The thought should have frightened him. Instead, in his exhaustion, it felt almost peaceful. The loneliness wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was simply there, like the snow outside. Endless, unmoving, cold. Then the night changed. At first he thought it was the wind. A faint sound, barely noticeable. Nathan frowned and listened. Nothing. He shook his head and returned his attention to the letter. A few moments later it came again. Soft, rhythmic. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Nathan looked toward the front door. The sound stopped. Silence returned. He waited. Then once more. Scratch, scratch, scratch. This time there was no mistaking it. Someone, or something, was outside. Nathan slowly rose from his chair. His joints protested as he stood. He grabbed the back of the chair for balance and listened carefully. Every instinct sharpened. Years of training still lived beneath the exhaustion. The scratching came again. Weak, uneven, almost desperate. Nathan crossed the room. The closer he moved toward the door, the more he noticed another sound mixed with the storm. Not scratching. Breathing. Faint breathing. He reached the entryway and rested one hand on the doorknob. Frost coated the edges of the frame. Cold air slipped through tiny gaps in the wood. Nathan hesitated. The scratching stopped completely. For a moment, he considered walking away, pretending he hadn't heard anything. Returning to his chair. Returning to the letter. Returning to the plan he had spent weeks convincing himself was final. But something held him there. Maybe. Curiosity. Maybe habit. Maybe something he couldn't yet name. Slowly, he unlocked the deadbolt. Wind immediately pressed against the door from the other side. Nathan took a breath and turned the handle. As the door began to open, freezing air rushed inside, carrying snow, pine scent, and something else. Something unexpected. Nathan's eyes dropped toward the porch, and what he saw there made him forget the letter entirely. Curled against the far corner of the porch was a German shepherd. At least, Nathan thought it was a German shepherd. The animal was so heavily coated in snow and ice it looked carved from the storm itself. Its fur had frozen into rough clumps along its back. Frost covered its whiskers. One ear stood upright while the other drooped beneath a layer of ice crystals. The dog was barely moving. The temperature had dropped below 0 hours earlier. Wind gusts were tearing across the valley at nearly 40 miles per hour. The dog's chest rose slightly, then fell. A thin cloud of breath drifted into the darkness. Alive, but barely. Nathan knelt slowly despite the ache in his joints. Snow immediately soaked the knees of his jeans. The dog opened its eyes. They were amber, deep amber. Even beneath exhaustion, they held an unusual clarity. Nathan felt something tighten in his chest. The animal did not growl. It did not retreat. It simply looked at him, as if it had spent its last remaining strength reaching this exact place. The dog seemed to notice. Its nose twitched faintly. Then its head lowered again. Nathan swallowed hard. He had seen that look before. Not in a dog. In people. Men who had pushed themselves beyond every limit because stopping meant giving up. Men who kept moving one step at a time, even when their bodies had nothing left to give. For a strange moment, he saw himself reflected there. Tired. Worn down. Ready to disappear. He reached out carefully. The dog flinched at first, then remained still. Its fur felt like frozen rope beneath his fingertips. Ice clung to its neck and shoulders. Nathan removed his flannel jacket and draped it over the animal without thinking. The cold immediately bit through his shirt. The dog blinked slowly. "You picked the wrong night to be out here, buddy," Nathan whispered. His voice sounded rough from disuse. The dog did not move. No vehicle tracks. No footprints. No sign of an owner. Just endless white stretching toward the tree line. He looked back at the animal. Leaving it outside was not an option. Whatever plans he had made for that evening suddenly felt distant and small. He slid one arm beneath the dog's chest and another under its hindquarters. The German Shepherd was lighter than it should have been. Far too light. Nathan felt ribs beneath the thick coat. The dog made a weak sound but did not resist. Slowly, carefully, Nathan carried it inside. He nudged the door shut with his foot. Nathan lowered the dog onto an old wool blanket near the hearth. For several seconds, neither one moved. The firelight danced across the room. The dog lay motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of its breathing. Nathan disappeared into the bathroom and returned with towels. He warmed them near the fire before gently pressing them against the frozen fur. Melted ice dripped onto the floorboards. Slowly, patches of sable fur emerged beneath the ice. The German Shepherd's coat was darker than Nathan first realized. Black along the spine, rich tan around the shoulders and legs. Old scars marked parts of the body beneath the fur. Not fresh scars. Old ones. The kind earned through years of life rather than a single bad day. Nathan paused. Something about the dog felt familiar. Disciplined. Alert even in exhaustion. He shook off the thought. He continued drying the animal until the trembling gradually lessened. At some point he realized he was talking. Nothing important. Just small observations. The weather. The fire. The ridiculous amount of snow piled against the porch. The kind of conversation people have when they have not spoken aloud in days. The dog listened with half-closed eyes. Around 2 in the morning, the animal finally managed to lift its head. Only for a second, but it was enough. Nathan felt unexpected relief. "That is it," he said quietly. "Stay with me." The word surprised him. Stay with me. Only after he said it did he realize how badly he needed someone to stay. The letter remained untouched on the table behind him. For the first time that night, the future had been interrupted by a living creature that needed him right now. Not tomorrow, not someday, but now. Eventually the dog shifted again. This time its head turned slightly toward him. Something metallic caught the light beneath the fur near its neck. Nathan frowned. He leaned closer. At first he thought it was a buckle hidden beneath the thick coat. But as he carefully brushed aside the damp fur, the firelight reflected off a worn piece of metal hanging from a weathered chain. A tag. An old military-style tag. Nathan's pulse slowed, then quickened, because engraved into the metal was a name he never expected to see again. Nathan stared at the tag as though it might disappear if he blinked. Outside, the storm had finally begun to lose its grip on the valley, but inside the cabin a different kind of weather had arrived. His fingers hovered over the worn metal. Years of scratches covered its surface. The edges were rounded from time and use. Yet the engraved letters remained unmistakable. Michael Carter. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. For a long moment, he simply knelt there beside the blanket, unable to look away. The name carried weight, not because it belonged to a stranger, because it belonged to a man he had once trusted with his life. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, warmer, and crowded with ghosts he thought he had buried years ago. He carefully lifted the tag and turned it over. Michael Carter. The German shepherd watched him with tired amber eyes. Michael had been the kind of man people remembered, not because he demanded attention, but because he gave it. He listened when others spoke. He laughed easily. He carried difficult moments without making them heavier for everyone else. Nathan could still hear that laugh if he allowed himself to. He could still picture a dusty afternoon overseas when they sat beneath a faded tarp, sharing instant coffee that tasted more like dirt than coffee. Michael had joked that one day they would both retire somewhere cold, buy a fishing boat, and complain about their knees together. Nathan remembered rolling his eyes. Instead, he looked down at the dog again. "How did you get this?" he asked quietly. The German shepherd blinked. That was all. Nathan shook his head. It was impossible. Michael had been gone for years. Long enough that most people had stopped mentioning his name. Long enough that life had moved forward whether Nathan wanted it to or not. Yet here it was. His name, hanging around the neck of a frozen dog that had appeared on the very night Nathan planned to disappear from the world. Coincidence, Nathan told himself. It had to be coincidence. Nothing more. He filled a bowl with fresh water and brought it back. The dog lifted its head slightly and drank. Nathan watched in silence. Then he prepared a small portion of food and placed it beside the blanket. The German shepherd sniffed cautiously before taking a few bites. Every movement seemed deliberate, controlled, even weakened. The animal carried itself differently than most strays Nathan had encountered. There was awareness there, and intelligence and patience, the kind that came from experience. Dawn arrived around 7 o'clock. Pale blue light filtered through the frost-covered windows. The storm clouds slowly broke apart over the mountains. Golden sunlight touched the distant peaks, turning them briefly into islands of fire above the snow-covered wilderness. Nathan had not slept. The letter remained untouched on the table. He had forgotten about it completely. Instead, he found himself sitting beside the dog, studying the tag over and over, searching for answers hidden between the scratches. The German shepherd eventually pushed itself upright. Nathan instinctively moved closer, ready to help if needed. But the dog remained standing, proud, steady. It slowly turned in a circle before settling again near the warmth of the fireplace. The dog looked directly toward the wall above the mantel. Hanging there was a framed photograph, an old one, taken nearly 15 years earlier. A group of young men standing shoulder to shoulder beneath a blazing desert sun. Nathan was among them. So was Michael Carter. The German shepherd stared at the photograph for several seconds. Then back at Nathan. A strange feeling crawled across the back of his neck. Dogs did not recognize people in old photographs. Dogs did not deliver messages. Dogs certainly did not arrive carrying impossible connections to the past. Later that morning, Nathan opened a storage chest he had not touched in years. He searched until he found what he was looking for. A picture of Michael standing beside a lake during a training trip many years ago. Michael was smiling. In his hands was a German shepherd puppy. Nathan frowned. He had forgotten about that dog. Michael had adopted the puppy shortly before one of their deployments. A stubborn little thing with oversized paws and ears that seemed too large for its head. Nathan studied the photograph, then looked at the dog sleeping near the fire, then back at the photograph. His heartbeat slowed. The coloring was similar. The eyes, even the shape of the ears. After all these years, it was impossible to know for certain. Yet the possibility settled heavily in the room. Could this dog somehow be connected to Michael? Could it really be the same animal all grown up? Nathan looked again at the weathered tag around its neck. The German shepherd opened one eye and watched him quietly. Fresh snow sparkled beneath the morning sun. The world looked clean again. New. But Nathan's attention remained fixed on the dog. Because for the first time since arriving at his cabin years earlier, he felt something he had not expected to feel. Curiosity. And deep beneath that curiosity was another feeling. Smaller. More fragile. Hope. Then the German shepherd slowly rose to its feet, walked toward the front door, and stopped. It looked back at Nathan once, as if asking him to follow. The German Shepherd stood by the front door with surprising determination for an animal that had nearly frozen to death the night before. Sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, turning the melted snow around his paws into small pools of gold. Nathan remained seated for a moment, watching him. "You should be resting," he said quietly. The dog's ears twitched. Nothing else. Then he glanced toward the door again. Nathan followed the look and sighed. Outside, the storm had left nearly 2 feet of fresh snow across the valley. The roads were buried. The woods beyond the cabin looked untouched by human presence. Whatever the dog believed was waiting out there could wait another day. At least, that was what Nathan told himself. Yet the feeling would not leave him. The German Shepherd was not behaving like a lost animal. He looked like an animal with a purpose. Nathan hated that thought because it sounded irrational. The kind of thing lonely people started believing after too much time spent in silence. He rose from the chair and walked toward the window. Bright sunlight reflected off the snow with almost painful intensity. The sky had cleared completely. Sharp blue stretched from one horizon to the other. Far beyond the valley, pine-covered ridges stood against the winter light like dark islands rising from a white sea. Nathan rubbed a hand across his face. His body felt exhausted from the sleepless night. Every muscle ached. The illness had been especially unforgiving lately. Even simple tasks left him drained. Yet beneath the fatigue something else had appeared. Curiosity. It had been a long time since anything stirred that feeling inside him. Most days followed the same pattern. Wake up. Endure. Sleep. Repeat. He looked toward the photograph still resting on the table. Michael Carter smiled back from 15 years ago, frozen forever in a moment untouched by time. Beside him sat a German Shepherd puppy. Nathan glanced toward the dog near the door. Finally, he reached for his winter coat hanging beside the entrance. "All right," he muttered. "You win." Not excited. Not playful. Focused. That strange sense of purpose. He pulled on gloves, boots, and a heavy wool hat. The cold struck instantly when he opened the door. Fresh air rushed into the cabin carrying the scent of pine, snow, and distant cedar smoke from some ranch miles away. The dog stepped outside first. Nathan followed. Snow crunched beneath his boots. The valley seemed impossibly quiet after the storm. Every sound felt softened beneath the blanket of fresh powder. The dog paused at the edge of the porch and looked toward the forest. Then he started walking. Not running. Walking. Slow enough for Nathan to follow. Nathan frowned. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Together they crossed the clearing behind the cabin. Sunlight sparkled across untouched snowdrifts. Ravens circled high overhead. The air smelled clean enough to drink. For nearly 15 minutes, they moved through the valley without a clear destination. Nathan's breathing gradually grew heavier. He stopped once to catch his breath. The German Shepherd immediately stopped too, waiting, watching, as though making certain Nathan was still coming. "Bossy," he said. Eventually, they reached the edge of the forest. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees beneath the shade. The world became quieter still. Nathan noticed tracks now. Not fresh tracks. Old ones. Almost hidden beneath the storm's snowfall. The dog followed them confidently. Nathan crouched to inspect them. Human footprints. Weeks old perhaps. Maybe older. Difficult to tell after the weather. The tracks led deeper into the woods. The dog kept moving. Nathan followed. The terrain became steeper. Snow-covered rocks protruded from the hillside. Wind whispered softly through the treetops overhead. Every so often the German Shepherd glanced behind him to make certain Nathan remained close. Nearly an hour passed before they reached a narrow ridge overlooking a frozen creek. There the dog stopped. Completely stopped. Nathan approached slowly. "What is it?" he asked. The dog lowered his head toward the snow. Nathan stepped closer and immediately noticed something unusual. Beneath the fresh snowfall, partially hidden among dead branches and ice, was the corner of a wooden post. He brushed away snow with his glove. More wood appeared, then a rusted metal marker attached near the top. Nathan cleared the remaining snow carefully. His breath caught. The marker displayed a faded family name. Carter. The world seemed to fall silent around him. No wind. No birds. Nothing except the sound of his own breathing. Michael's family had owned property somewhere in Montana decades earlier. Nathan remembered hearing stories about it. A remote cabin inherited from grandparents. A place Michael always talked about restoring someday. A place he never got the chance to see again. Nathan slowly turned toward the dog. The German shepherd watched him quietly. Not proud, not expectant, simply patient, as though this was only the beginning. Nathan looked beyond the marker and noticed something else. Hidden among the trees farther up the ridge stood the faint outline of a structure almost completely buried beneath snow. A roofline, a chimney, a cabin, and for reasons he could not explain, a chill moved through him that had nothing to do with the Montana winter. One moment Nathan could see its roofline clearly. The next, it blended into the mountainside as though winter itself were trying to hide it. Nathan followed, his boots sinking several inches into fresh powder with every step. The climb was not long, but it felt longer because his thoughts refused to stay quiet. Michael's family cabin. After all these years, the idea alone felt impossible. The family name carved into old wood had not been a dream. As they approached, details slowly emerged from beneath the snow. One corner of the roof had partially collapsed years ago under the weight of countless winters. Nathan stopped several feet away. The place looked abandoned, but not forgotten. Nathan could feel the difference. Forgotten places felt empty. This cabin felt as though it were holding its breath. The German shepherd walked directly to the front steps and sat. Nathan stared at him. "You've definitely done this before," he murmured. The dog simply watched. Nathan climbed the snow-covered steps carefully. The wooden boards groaned beneath his weight, but held firm. He brushed snow from the front door and discovered an old iron handle darkened by time. A thick padlock hung from the latch. Rust covered most of its surface. The metal practically crumbled beneath his glove. Years of weather had done their work. The lock had not protected anything in a very long time. Nathan hesitated. Entering felt wrong somehow, like opening a chapter that belonged to someone else. Yet standing there, he remembered Michael's voice from years ago. "Someday I will fix that place up. You should see it. Best view in Montana." Michael had talked about the cabin the way other people talked. About childhood homes. Nathan slowly pushed the door. Sunlight spilled through cracks in the walls, illuminating tiny particles floating in the air like gold dust. Nathan stepped inside. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. An old rocking chair sat near a window overlooking the valley. Shelves lined another wall, most of them empty now. Snow had found its way through gaps in the roof, forming small white drifts along the floorboards. A coffee mug rested on a shelf. A faded blanket hung over the back of a chair. Family photographs occupied a narrow mantel above the fireplace. His heart felt unusually heavy. One photograph showed Michael as a teenager standing beside an older couple near a fishing dock. Another showed a younger version of Michael holding a German shepherd puppy with paws too large for its body. Nathan froze. It was the same photograph he had found earlier inside his own storage chest. The same puppy, the same crooked ears. He looked back toward the doorway. The German shepherd stood watching him quietly. Nathan swallowed. He lowered his nose to the floor near the stone hearth and began sniffing. Then he pawed gently at the boards. Once, twice. Nathan frowned. "What is it?" The dog repeated the motion. Nathan crouched beside him. The floorboards looked ordinary at first glance. Yet when he brushed away years of dirt, he noticed a faint outline between the boards. A rectangular shape hidden within the floor itself. His pulse quickened. Carefully, he examined the edges. Someone had built a concealed compartment beneath the flooring. Nathan stared at it for several seconds, then laughed softly under his breath. "Michael," he whispered. "Of course you did." The man had always hidden spare keys, emergency cash, and handwritten notes in places nobody else would think to look. A secret compartment beneath the family cabin floor felt exactly like him. Nathan searched nearby until he found an old fireplace poker leaning against the wall. Using the flat end, he carefully lifted the hidden panel. Beneath the compartment rested a small metal box. The lid was tarnished, but intact. Nathan's hands suddenly felt unsteady. The German shepherd sat beside him, watching every movement. Nathan slowly lifted the container from its hiding place. It felt heavier than expected. Years ago, Michael had hidden this here. Years ago, he had expected to come back someday and open it himself. But life had taken a different path. Nathan looked down at the box, then at the dog. The German shepherd's amber eyes never left him. Taking a slow breath, Nathan finally opened the lid. Inside were dozens of carefully bundled letters. And resting on top of them was an envelope with one name written across the front in familiar handwriting. Nathan. Nathan stared at the envelope as though it were something fragile enough to vanish in his hands. For a long moment, he could not move. Michael's handwriting covered the front of the envelope in dark blue ink faded by time. Nathan had seen that handwriting on mission notes, birthday cards, and countless scraps of paper over the years. Yet seeing it here felt impossible. The German shepherd settled quietly beside him. The dog seemed calmer now, as though reaching this place had completed some important task. Nathan swallowed and carefully opened the envelope. If you're reading this, then life probably surprised both of us. Nathan let out a slow breath. He continued reading. I do not know when you found this. I do not know how old we are, or what kind of trouble you managed to get yourself into. But if this letter reached you, then there is something I need to say. Nathan sat down heavily in the old rocking chair. Michael wrote first about ordinary things. Fishing trips they never took. Jokes from training. The terrible coffee they both pretended to enjoy. Nathan found himself laughing softly once or twice despite the weight in his chest. Then the tone changed. There is something I learned after enough years wearing a uniform. Men like us get very good at carrying weight. We carry responsibility. We carry memories. We carry regret. Sometimes we carry so much that we forget how to put any of it down. Nathan stopped reading. His fingers tightened around the paper. Even the wind outside felt distant. Slowly he continued. If you're reading this because life became heavy, listen carefully. You were never meant to carry it all alone. Somewhere along the way, we start believing strength means silence. It does not. Real strength is staying when every tired part of you wants to leave. Nathan lowered his eyes. His throat tightened unexpectedly. He glanced toward the doorway. The letter he had written for himself the night before suddenly flashed through his mind. Folded, waiting on the table back at his cabin, waiting beside a bowl of cold soup. He looked back at Michael's words. The handwriting seemed almost alive, as if his friend were sitting across from him once more. For a while, Nathan did not read on. He just sat there with the letter open in his hands, letting the quiet do what conversation had failed to do for years. He had spent so much time believing grief was something a man should manage privately, like a wound under a shirt. Keep it covered. Keep moving. Do not complain. Do not make other people uncomfortable with the truth of it. But Michael's words reached past every defense Nathan had built. They did not shame him for being tired. They did not order him to be brave. They simply reminded him that being broken was not the same thing as being finished. He thought about all the calls he had ignored from old teammates because he could not bear the pity in their voices. He thought about the neighbor down the road who had offered to plow his driveway twice, and how Nathan had turned him away both times. He thought about the pharmacist in town who always asked if he needed anything else, and how he always answered no before the question had even settled. Maybe loneliness had not only found him. Maybe, piece by piece, he had helped build the walls that kept it close. Ghost shifted beside him, old bones creaking softly, then leaned his shoulder against Nathan's leg as if the dog understood exactly what had happened in that room. Nathan lowered one hand to the shepherd's head. The fur was still rough from the storm, but warmth had returned beneath it. That simple warmth undid him more than the letter did. He bowed his head, and the first tears came without permission, quiet and humbling. He did not try to stop them. For once, he let something inside him fall, apart without calling it weakness. Another paragraph caught his attention. If Ghost is with you, then I already know one thing. He chose you. That dog has better instincts than most people I have met. Nathan froze. His eyes lifted toward the German shepherd. Ghost. The name sat on the page as plainly as sunlight. The dog looked back at him with calm amber eyes. Suddenly dozens of memories returned. Michael talking endlessly about his stubborn puppy. Michael laughing because Ghost refused to obey anyone he did not trust. Michael claiming the dog could read hearts better than humans. Nathan stared at the animal in disbelief. Years had changed him. Time had silvered parts of his muzzle. Yet somehow Ghost had survived. Somehow Ghost had found his way here. A strange warmth spread through Nathan's chest. The letter continued. If Ghost ever brings someone to this cabin, pay attention. He does not waste effort. Nathan shook his head and laughed quietly. The sound echoed through the empty room. You stubborn old dog, he whispered. Ghost's ears twitched at the familiar voice. Nathan returned to the final page. The handwriting grew slightly less steady near the bottom, but the message remained clear. Life will hurt you. It hurts everyone eventually. But promise me something. Don't disappear before your story is finished. There are people you have not met yet. There are sunsets you have not seen. There are reasons to stay that you cannot imagine today. Trust that. Nathan stopped reading. The words blurred briefly as moisture filled his eyes. He sat very still. The years seemed to collapse around him. Grief, exhaustion, loneliness, all of it surfaced at once. Yet something else appeared beside those feelings. Something lighter. A small crack in the darkness. Hope. Not loud hope. Not dramatic hope. Just enough to let in a little light. Outside, a breeze stirred fresh snow from the pine branches. Tiny crystals drifted through the sunlight like falling diamonds. Nathan folded the letter carefully and held it against his chest. Ghost rose from the floor and crossed the room. Without hesitation, the old German shepherd rested his head on Nathan's knee. Neither moved for several moments. Then Nathan noticed something else inside the metal box beneath the remaining stack of letters. A folded map. And marked in red ink near the northern edge of the valley was a location that made his pulse quicken all over again. The folded map felt surprisingly heavy in Nathan's hands. Not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. Another piece of a trail he had never expected to follow. The paper crackled softly as he unfolded it across the dusty table inside the cabin. Age had yellowed the edges. Creases ran through the center like tiny rivers. Yet the markings remained clear. Michael's handwriting appeared in several places, labeling ridges, creeks, and forgotten landmarks scattered across the valley. Nathan immediately recognized some of them. Others meant nothing to him. One location, however, stood apart from the rest. A small red circle near the northern ridge. Beside it were only 3 handwritten words. For later, Nathan stared at the phrase. It sounded exactly like Michael. The man had always left himself reminders. Notes stuffed into books. Messages hidden inside toolboxes. Ideas scribbled onto napkins and forgotten in jacket pockets. For later, Nathan shook his head with a faint smile. You really thought ahead, did you not? Ghost remained beside the fireplace, watching quietly. The old dog seemed exhausted from the journey, yet somehow lighter than before. His purpose had led here. That much felt certain now. Nathan carefully folded the map and slipped it into his coat pocket. Then he gathered the letters and returned them to the metal box. Whatever waited at the marked location would have to wait until tomorrow. The winter sun had already begun its slow descent toward the mountains. Shadows stretched longer across the snow outside. The temperature would drop quickly once darkness arrived. Nathan and Ghost left the cabin together. Before stepping away, Nathan glanced back one final time. The weathered structure stood silently among the pines. Somehow it felt awake now. The walk home felt different from the journey there. The forest no longer seemed empty. Every tree carried memory. Every gust of wind felt like part of a conversation still unfolding. Ghost moved at a relaxed pace beside him, no longer leading, simply accompanying, as though the next decision belonged entirely to Nathan. The sun dipped lower. Golden light spilled through the branches, painting the snow in shades of amber and copper. For years Nathan had crossed these mountains without really seeing them. He noticed that now. The way sunlight glowed on frozen creek beds. The way ravens glided effortlessly across the winter sky. The scent of pine warming beneath afternoon sun. Small things. Beautiful things. Things he had stopped paying attention to long ago. Halfway back to the cabin, a sudden wave of fatigue forced him to stop. He leaned against a tree and closed his eyes briefly. The illness had not disappeared. His body still felt fragile. His breathing still came harder than it should. The reality of his condition remained unchanged. Yet something inside him had shifted. The weight felt different. Not gone, but somehow shared. Ghost immediately stopped beside him. The dog looked up, studying him carefully. Nathan laughed softly. I'm fine. Ghost continued staring. Nathan sighed. All right. Maybe not completely fine. The dog seemed satisfied with the honesty. They resumed walking. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk had settled across the valley. The first stars appeared overhead. Nathan lit the fireplace and prepared a simple meal. This time he made enough for 2. Ghost ate slowly, then settled near the hearth. Nathan sat at the table with Michael's letter unfolded beside him. The envelope that once held his own goodbye letter still rested nearby. He looked at it for a long time. The words inside no longer felt like they belonged to him. Not entirely. Finally, he opened the envelope and removed the pages. He read them once, then folded them carefully and placed them in the fireplace. The flames caught slowly. The edges curled first. Then the ink faded into glowing embers. Nathan watched until nothing remained but ash. He expected relief. Instead, he felt something quieter. Acceptance. The future remained uncertain. The illness remained real. Tomorrow promised no guarantees. Yet for the first time in a very long while, he found himself wondering what might happen next. That question alone felt like a miracle. The next morning arrived clear and cold. Sunlight spilled across the valley. Ghost stood waiting by the door before Nathan even finished his coffee. Nathan noticed immediately. The old determination had returned. The same look the dog wore before leading him to Michael's cabin. "You want to go somewhere," Nathan said. Ghost's tail gave a single slow sweep across the floor. Nathan laughed. "I thought so." An hour later, they were moving north through fresh snow, following the route marked on Michael's map. The climb grew steeper with every mile. Wind swept across exposed ridges. The mountains stretched endlessly in every direction. Around noon, they reached the location marked by the red circle. Nathan stopped. The view stole what breath he had left. A frozen lake rested below the ridge, perfectly still beneath the winter sky. Pine forests surrounded it like a protective wall. Sunlight reflected off the ice in dazzling sheets of silver. But that was not what caught his attention. Near the shoreline stood a small wooden structure partially hidden among the trees. Newer than the family cabin. Better maintained. Nathan frowned. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney, but recent footprints surrounded the entrance. Someone had been there. Recently. Very recently. Ghost moved forward at once, then stopped halfway down the slope. His ears lifted. His body became perfectly still. Nathan followed his gaze toward the cabin. The front door slowly opened, and an elderly woman stepped out holding something in her hands that made Nathan's heart nearly stop. The elderly woman stood motionless in the doorway as the winter wind moved gently through the trees around her. In her hands, she held a framed photograph. Even from halfway down the ridge, Nathan recognized the face inside it. Michael, younger and smiling, standing beside the very same German shepherd now frozen in place beside Nathan. For a moment, nobody moved. The lake below reflected the pale winter sun like polished glass. Snow glittered across the shoreline. The entire valley seemed suspended between past and present. Then the woman looked directly at Ghost. Her eyes widened. The photograph slipped slightly in her hands. "No," she whispered. The word drifted across the snow. "It can't be." Ghost took a slow step forward. Then another. The old dog moved carefully down the slope toward the cabin. The woman covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Nathan followed several yards behind, unsure whether he was walking into a memory or a miracle. As they reached the bottom of the hill, Ghost stopped only a few feet from her. For several seconds, they simply stared at one another. Then the woman slowly knelt despite the snow. Tears filled her eyes. "Ghost," she whispered. The dog's tail moved once. Just once. Yet it seemed to break something open inside her. She reached out a shaking hand and rested it against the side of his face. Ghost closed his eyes briefly. The woman began crying softly, not with sadness, with the overwhelming relief of someone finding a lost piece of their life after believing it gone forever. Nathan stood quietly nearby, unwilling to interrupt the moment. Eventually the woman looked up at him. Her face carried the lines of many winters, but there was kindness there. Warmth. Familiarity. "You're Nathan Walker." It was not a question. Nathan blinked. "How do you know my name?" The woman smiled through her tears. "Because Michael never stopped talking about you." A strange silence followed, the kind that arrives when reality shifts beneath your feet. The woman rose slowly and introduced herself as Margaret Carter, Michael's aunt, the last remaining family member still living in the valley. She invited Nathan inside. The cabin was small but welcoming. A wood stove glowed warmly near one wall. The scent of cinnamon and cedar filled the air. Family photographs covered nearly every shelf. Michael appeared in many of them. Fishing, hiking, laughing, living. Nathan found himself studying each image as though trying to recover lost years. Margaret poured coffee into 2 mugs. Ghost settled beside the stove as if he had done so 100 times before. "I haven't seen him in almost 3 years, Margaret said softly, glancing toward the dog. "One day he simply disappeared into the mountains. I thought." Her voice faded. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Nathan looked at Ghost. The old dog rested peacefully near the warmth. For the first time since arriving at Nathan's cabin, he seemed completely at ease. Margaret noticed the military tag around his neck and smiled sadly. Michael made that himself. Nathan nodded. He led me to the family cabin. Margaret's eyes widened slightly. Then he finally decided it was time. Nathan frowned. Time for what? Margaret stood and crossed the room. From a bookshelf, she retrieved a worn journal bound in dark leather. The cover showed years of use. She placed it carefully on the table. Michael visited me before his final deployment. Her voice remained calm, though emotion lingered beneath every word. He told me something I never forgot. He said if anything ever happened to him, Ghost would know where to go. Not immediately, not after a few weeks or months, but someday. Nathan stared at the journal. Someday. Margaret nodded. He believed there would come a time when someone he loved would need saving. The words settled heavily between them. Nathan looked away. Through the window, he could see sunlight dancing across the frozen lake. He knew exactly who Michael had met. Margaret gently opened the journal. Several loose papers rested inside. Notes, maps, photographs. One folded page had been marked with Nathan's name. Margaret slid it across the table. He left this with me years ago. Nathan hesitated before unfolding it. The message was brief. Just a few lines written in familiar handwriting. If Ghost ever brings Nathan here, tell him something for me. Tell him that surviving is not the same as living. Tell him he owes me at least one fishing trip before either of us gets too old. Nathan laughed unexpectedly. A real laugh. The first genuine one in years. It escaped before he could stop it. Margaret smiled. Ghost lifted his head at the sound. Nathan read the note again. Then again. The words were simple, yet they carried more weight than pages of advice ever could. Surviving is not the same as living. He thought about the months spent hiding from the world, the unopened mail, the unanswered phone calls, the endless days measured only by symptoms and silence. He thought about the letter he had burned, about the storm, about the scratching at his door. Outside, the afternoon sun slowly drifted toward the western mountains. Shadows stretched across the lake. Golden light filled the cabin windows. Nathan looked down at Ghost. The old German shepherd met his gaze calmly. Not as a rescuer, not as a hero, simply as a friend who had refused to give up on him. And in that quiet moment, Nathan realized something that made his chest tighten all over again. He had spent days believing he was following Ghost's trail. The truth was much simpler. Ghost had been leading him home. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the valley. Weeks passed, then months. Snow retreated from the hillsides. Streams began singing beneath melting ice. The long Montana spring arrived quietly, one sunrise at a time. Nathan found himself waking earlier now. Not because pain forced him awake. Not because loneliness chased away sleep. He woke because there were places to go, people to see, reasons to step outside. Some mornings, he helped Margaret repair fences around her property. Other days, he worked on restoring Michael's family cabin. The old structure still leaned slightly toward the forest, but fresh lumber replaced broken boards. New windows reflected the mountain sky. Smoke once again rose from the chimney. Life had returned to a place that had waited years for someone to come home. Ghost remained at Nathan's side through it all. The old German shepherd moved more slowly now. His muzzle had grown wider. Some days his joints seemed stiff when morning temperatures dropped. Yet his eyes remained bright. Purpose still lived there. Every evening they sat together on the porch overlooking the valley. Nathan with a cup of coffee. Ghost stretched beside him. Neither needed to say anything. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt earned. One afternoon in early June, Nathan drove into town for a medical appointment. The clinic sat near the edge of Livingston beneath a row of cottonwood trees. 6 months earlier he would have canceled. 6 months. Earlier he had stopped believing treatment mattered. Now he walked through the front door, carrying something unfamiliar. Hope. The examination took nearly 2 hours. Tests, questions, conversations. When it ended, his doctor sat across from him and smiled. It was not the smile of someone promising miracles. It was something better. Honest encouragement. The illness remained. Recovery would not be simple, but progress was real. Nathan listened carefully. For the first time in years, he wanted to hear every word. He asked questions. He wrote down instructions. He scheduled the follow-up before he could talk himself out of it. Outside, Ghost waited patiently beneath a patch of shade near the parking lot. The moment Nathan emerged, the dog rose to his feet. Nathan knelt beside him and rested a hand against his neck. Looks like we're not finished yet, partner. Ghost's tail brushed the ground. That summer, Word quietly spread about the restored cabin and the veteran living there. Hikers stopped by occasionally. Travelers lost in the mountains found directions and warm coffee waiting. A local rancher brought an injured shepherd mix one evening. Nathan helped care for the animal until it recovered. Then another dog arrived. Then another. Nobody planned it. It simply happened. By autumn, a small wooden sign stood near the road leading into the valley. Walker Ridge Rescue. The name made Nathan laugh the first time he saw it. Margaret claimed the community voted on it. Nathan suspected she organized the entire thing herself. The rescue remained small. A few kennels. A renovated barn. Plenty of hard work. Yet every animal that arrived seemed to heal something inside him as well. The mission he thought he had lost returned in a different form. Not through orders. Not through uniforms. Through compassion. Through showing up. Through staying. One golden evening nearly a year after the storm, Nathan stood beside the lake where Ghost had first led him to Margaret's cabin. The water reflected orange and crimson clouds drifting across the horizon. Pine trees swayed gently in the cooling breeze. Nearby, Ghost rested comfortably on the grass. Age had slowed him, but peace had found him. Nathan removed a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. The final copy of the letter he had once written on the darkest night of his life. He had carried it for months without opening it. Not because he needed the words anymore. Because he needed to remember the distance between then and now. Slowly, he unfolded the page. The hopelessness felt unfamiliar now, like hearing the voice of a stranger. When he finished, he folded it again and placed it inside a small campfire burning near the shoreline. Then the words were gone. Nathan watched the sparks drift upward into the evening sky. Ghost rose and walked over. With a soft sigh, he rested his head against Nathan's knee exactly as he had done so many times before. Nathan looked toward the mountains glowing beneath the last light of day. He thought about Michael, about Margaret, about the storm, about a frozen dog scratching at a door in the middle of the night. 1,000 different moments had led here. None of them made complete sense on their own. Together, they formed something larger, something that felt remarkably close to grace. Nathan smiled and scratched behind Ghost's ears. "We still owe him that fishing trip," he said softly. Ghost's tail thumped once against the grass. The sun disappeared beyond the mountains. Evening settled across the valley. And for the first time in many years, Nathan was not looking back at what he had lost. He was looking forward to tomorrow.